It's good to see you today. I hope you are having a good day. Today is Wednesday, January 26th, and our reading today is from the book of Job. As we go through in our daily readings, we're in Job. Today we're looking at chapters 26 through 29. Let's go over there and let's take a gander at it. Job 26, and you might remember yesterday we ended with a short chapter, actually, chapter 25, as Bildad speaks to Job. And Bildad says, "Dominion and fear belong to God. He makes peace in the high places. How then can a man be righteous before God?" So the ongoing theme of their assuming that Job has sinned. Now, chapter 26. Job's reply. And he begins by speaking about, well, for one thing, you might notice, how have you helped him who is without power? How have you saved the arm that has no strength? How have you counseled one who has no wisdom? So he's asking for them to somewhat examine themselves. Remember what he calls them in another place, sorry comforters. But then he starts talking about God. Verse 7. He stretches out the north over empty space. He hangs the earth on nothing. Verse 10, he drew a circular horizon, just talking about God's creation, the power of God, what God has done. Verse 14, indeed, these are the mere edges of his ways, and how small a whisper we hear of him. And that's absolutely true. We just get a glimpse of the power of God. Now chapter 27. Job, as he continues to speak, and we're going to go through and we're going to look at a few different ideas. But you might notice there in let's just start there in verse 2. As God lives, who has taken away my injustice, and the Almighty, who has made my soul bitter. As long as my breath is in me and the breath of God in my nostrils, my lips will not speak My lips will not speak wickedness, nor my tongue utter deceit. That's a good thing. And we remember from the very beginning when Job's wife told him, "Why do you hold fast your integrity, curse God and die?" And these individuals, Job's friends, are assuming he sinned. And basically they are wanting him. You know, sometimes in police dramas on TV and in movies, sometimes someone who's innocent, the cops are saying, just confess. We know you did it, just confess. And if the individual is innocent, they're trying to hold to their innocence, but sometimes they cave, and even though they're not guilty, they confess to something that they didn't do. Well, that's almost this picture that we have with Job and his friends. They're saying, just fess up to it. And Job says, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. To look back in our passage, as long as my breath is in me and the breath of God is in my nostrils, my lips will not speak wickedness, nor my tongue utter deceit. Far be it from me that I should say you are right. Till I die, I will not put away my integrity from me. My righteousness I hold fast and will not let it go. My heart shall not reproach me as long as I live. Within our chapters today, he is going to speak about the things that he did and how he was not neglectful in doing what God wanted him to do. I've said all that to say this. It's a good thing. Job says, he says repeatedly throughout our text, tell me what I've done wrong, because I've been doing what God wants me to do. If I see someone who's neglected, I don't neglect them, I help them. If I see someone who's impoverished, I stretch out my hand to them. I have done what God wants me to do. And as we look at God's majesty, and Job is saying, I fear God. I fear God. And he's doing what's right. Back to our reading now. As he continues on, and here in chapter 27, let's come down a little bit, and actually just as we look at the chapter, as he says, verse 11, I will teach you about the hand of God. What is with the Almighty I will not conceal. Surely you have seen it. Why then do you behave with this complete nonsense? Let's look at the next chapter. In the next chapter, Job's going to talk about the wisdom of God. But he's going to talk about, just read a little bit, surely there is a mine for silver and a place where gold is refined. Iron is taken from the earth, copper is smelted from ore. Man puts an end to darkness and searches every recess for ore in the darkness and shadow of death. He's talking about things that are hidden. And he's talking about, eventually, as he's using it as a metaphor for the wisdom of God. He breaks open a shaft away from the people in places forgotten by feet. But he keeps talking about what God has done, and it's verse 12. But where can wisdom be found? And he's talking about the things that man drags out of the ground, the things that are even hidden from the surface. But he says, as he talks about that, he says, who's going to find the wisdom of God? And, other passages talk about how God conceals a matter. And so he's talking about that which is hidden and searching for it. That's the idea, I think. But just in talking about the wisdom of God, here in chapter 28, verse 12, where can wisdom be found, and where is the place of understanding? Man does not know its value, nor is it found in the land of the living. The deep says, it is not in me, and the sea says, it is not with me. It cannot be purchased for gold, nor can silver be weighed for its price. Cannot be valued in the gold of Ophir and precious onyx or sapphire. Neither gold nor crystal can equal it, nor can it be exchanged for jewelry of fine gold. As he speaks about the wisdom of God, and it's more valuable than rubies. He'll talk about, I believe, in the same chapter. Verse 20, where does wisdom come from? From where then does wisdom come, and where is the place of understanding? It is hidden from the eyes of all living, concealed from the birds of the air. Verse 23, actually go and look at verse 22. Destruction and death say, we have heard a report about it with our ears. You might think about the proverb, better to go to the house of mourning. Verse 23, though, God understands its way and he knows its place. For he looked to the ends of the earth, and he sees under the whole heavens, to establish a weight for the wind, and apportion the waters by measure. When he made a law for the rain, and a path for the thunderbolt. Then he saw wisdom and declared it, he prepared it, indeed he searched it out. And to man he said, behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to depart from evil is understanding. Job is recognizing the wisdom of God. Fearing the Lord. Fear the Lord, what Solomon says, right? This is fear the Lord and keep his commandments. To depart from evil is understanding. More valuable than rubies. More precious than gold. What will a man give in exchange for the wisdom of God? Now here's the issue. And it's a question of recognizing the power of God, recognizing the wisdom of God, at least conceptually. But the question is in application, in applying it to our lives. And that's the following chapter. That's chapter 29. And this is where I think Job has trouble. In chapter 29, Job further continued his discourse. And that's, in the multitude of words, sin is not lacking. Job further continued his discourse and said, oh, that as I were in months past, as in the days when God watched over me, when the lamp shone upon my head, and when by his light I walked through darkness, just as I was in the days of my prime, when the friendly counsel of God was over my tent, when the Almighty was yet with me, when my children were around me, when my steps were bathed with cream, and the rock poured out rivers of oil for me. What Job is saying is, how I wish I was back in the good old days. And there are proverbs about that mentality that talk about how that's not a wise thing. That we shouldn't say, "Oh, I wish we were living back in the good old days." We need to be real careful, and Job needed to be real careful, because he talks in the previous chapter about the power of God, the wisdom of God, the majesty of God, all those things. But now as he starts thinking about himself, and just look at that chapter, and just notice the eyes, if you will. Oh, that I were as in months past, just as I was in the days of my prime, when the Almighty was yet with me. Has God forsaken you, Job? I understand that's what he's wondering. That's what he's having trouble with. It's like you just talked about how God sees everything, that nothing is hidden from God. When my steps were bathed with cream, when I went out to the gate by the city, when I took my seat in the open square, young men saw me and hid, the aged arose and stood. He was treated like a king, is what he talks about. He says, because I delivered the poor who cried out. And these things are good things. He says, I delivered the poor. But he's talking about how he was treated. He says, I put on righteousness. It clothed me. My justice was like a robe and a turban. I was the eyes to the blind. I was feet to the lame. I broke the fangs of the wicked. Verse 17. Verse 18. Then I said, I shall die in my nest and multiply my days as in the sand. My root is spread out to the waters, and the dew lies all night on my branch. Oh, my glory is fresh within me. Men listened to me and waited and kept silence for my counsel. They waited for me, verse 23, they waited for me as for the rain. Verse 25, I chose the way for them and sat as chief. So I dwelt as a king in the army, as one who comforts mourners. There were awful lot of eyes in there. And we need to be real careful. Because when times are good and we think God's on our side when times are good. And God was on Job's side, we'll say that. But then when times are bad, all of a sudden we start thinking, oh, I wish I was living back in the old days. I wish I was living back then, when I was living high on the hog. We need to be real careful when we're going through trials and tribulations to make sure that we're not being selfish, to not start thinking that everything is about me. Job started off so well as he was focusing on the majesty of God, the power of God, the wisdom of God. But then when he starts talking about the good old days, it just starts sounding selfish. And what Job needed to understand is the same thing that we all need to understand. God is still God. The trials that we go through, God is still God. He's still powerful. He still sees everything. What we have to realize is that in weakness there is strength. What Job needed to realize is just as much as he manifested the wisdom of God in the good days, he was now going to have the opportunity to manifest the wisdom of God as the trials have come upon him. So, he needs to be careful, but at the same time, he's on that journey that we're all on. He needs to be careful and not speak out of turn. He needs to speak straightly with his friends. But when you start questioning God, and when you start looking back on the pass through rose-tinted glasses. You need to be careful. So, hope this study's been helpful for you as we just taken a brief look at these chapters. Hope you have a good day and hope to see you tomorrow. Thanks for being with us.